Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and other people who may identify as different genders. Welcome to Tuesday, November the 10th. Please keep in mind that tomorrow there's no class because we have Remembrance Day, so you can sleep in and relax. But when you do get up, remember to maybe just take a minute or so to think about all of those people who have died in the sort of defense of our country or the defense of other countries. Obviously, some of those issues are kind of fraught depending on what side of a given war you might be on. But here in Canada, we like to set aside some time to think about those people because, as we've talked about in this class, lots and lots of people die in the process of conflicts in the 20th century and even still into the 21st. And so it's, we relied on their sacrifice to kind of create the world as it is, for better or worse. And yeah, we should remember that, right? Right, let me say hello to who's here. So Ayushi's here, good morning Ayushi, and Ananda's here, good morning. Kevin's here, hello Kevin. Helen is here, good morning to you. And Ashley's here, morning Ashley. And Ryan is here, good morning. And John is here, good morning. And Ty is here, also good morning. Shafan is here, hello. And Hadil is here, good morning. And Shania is here, good morning to you as well. Okay, oh yeah, how'd the quiz go? Trash? Oh, okay. Well, it wasn't my best work, but I mean, I don't think you need to call it trash.
It was more of your questions were fine. I know that. It's just that I rushed some. And I was like, oh, no, I have no time to do this, so I kind of just had to skip some. So
Okay.
it was bad on my end.
Okay, a little bit of a stumble on that, yeah. Maud, good? Okay. Ayana? Making a tentative face. Hey Rose, how'd the quiz go there yesterday? So-so? Okay. Okay, all right, well, we'll see. I haven't marked them yet. I was marking papers last night, so I'll probably do the quizzes today. I think I've got a meeting that I need to attend, but I don't need to actually say anything, so I'll just listen to the meeting and mark your quizzes. What's that? Yes. Yeah, I've got, I think, 4 of them done so far, and I'll try to get another couple done this afternoon if I can kind of squeeze it in. And so I'll get through them. I'm trying to get through them by Friday because the social justice papers are due on Friday, and so I'll have a whole other batch to do. So I'm going to try to, and then let me just check my calendar here. So today's the 10th, and then 16. If I gave you the assignment for the final paper, so whatever the question or topic or whatever it is, if I gave you that on the 16th, could I ask for it to be due on the last day of class, which is December the 4th? That's 3 weeks. Could I do that? Because I think 3 weeks is enough. Like, I could give you longer, but sometimes when you give students longer, it just means it takes them longer to start. And so, so I could give you like 9 weeks to write it, but if you're not going to start it until 2 weeks before, those first 7 weeks are a waste anyway, right? So if 3 weeks is enough, maybe that's what I'll do, is I'll try to give you the assignment on Monday, on the 16th, and then you can hand it in on the last day of class, and then you're done. 4th? 4th? Yeah, December 4th is the last day. And then you'll be done. You won't have to worry about this anymore. There's no final exam, and you can go into exam week and just deal with whatever other exams you have. What's that?
It's almost the same thing is going on with my English.
Okay.
That I have.
Okay.
And there wasn't any midterm exam. So the only possible finals would be for CLE and music.
Would music end?
CLE.
Oh, and CLE. Okay, well that's not bad. How's music going?
That's pretty fun.
Yeah, Tom's great, hey?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can hear them. I mean, you can hear them like in the last period. While we're doing work, you can hear them sing.
Yeah? Oh man, I should come back and hear them sing. Ahmad's look of terror makes it even more enticing to come back.
Are you gonna do the same thing for social justice?
I think I might try.
I also feel so bad for you.
You feel what?
For Aliana.
You feel so?
She takes both.
I know. Imagine being stuck with me all morning. Torture. Okay. Okay, so maybe that'll be the tentative plan. I will try to get your micropapers marked by Friday. I'll try to give you the assignment for the final paper on Monday. That way you'll have a full 3 weeks to do it. Maybe I can give you a little bit of class time too, although I don't know if that's entirely useful. And then you can have it due for the last day of class, and that will give me all of exam week to mark it, and that will give you, exam week free to deal with your other things. Good morning, Amanda.
Oh, so we both get advantages.
What's that?
We both get advantages.
We both get advantages. Yes, it's a win-win situation, which I like. So, yeah, I think that, and that just means that I'll be able to grade them more quickly and get your grades to you more quickly, which I think everyone wants at that time of year. They're like, "What's my mark? What's my mark?" So, yeah, that will allow me to do that more quickly as well. Okay, deal? Okay, that's the tentative plan. I will try to make that happen. So, finally, back in the USSR, as the Beatles once sang. So we said that Lenin, of course, overthrew the government. It was called a communist revolution, but really it was kind of a coup d'etat by communists, which is not entirely the same thing, right? Marx assumed that the masses would kind of revolt and overthrow the bourgeoisie and take control, but here we have a small party who is kind of in love with the writings of Marx, and they decide they're going to overthrow the government and sort of install communism from the top down, which again is not how it's supposed to work. And as we'll see, or as we saw, it doesn't quite work very well at all, right? Because the poor Russian peasants who are living in the Soviet Union at the time, they're not too into communism. They're not literate, so they haven't read Marx. They're not too into Marx, and really what they want is their own land so that they can farm it. Maybe a little bit of investment from the government would be nice, and then they want to sell that harvest on the market and try to make a little bit of extra cash, right? They're not going to get rich. Let's be realistic, but they just want to earn a better living than they have been, and they've been struggling for years and years and years, right? In basically poverty, they've been starving through food shortages, and they just want a little upgrade in quality of life, right? And again, here comes Lenin. He overthrows the provisional government, jails all of those guys, takes control, and tries to install communism from the top down. We heard that it didn't work very well at first, right? And so the program was to get peasants to kind of work on larger farms and get them to turn over their harvest to the state, and then of course the state would redistribute it to those who needed it, right? But of course the peasants aren't too into that idea either, right? And so lots of them don't hand over their harvest to the state, where they kind of secretly sell it on the black market for extra money. And so again, they wind up with food shortages because the food that's supposed to kind of go into the government system isn't going in. It's kind of leaking out into the black market on the side, and only people with money can afford the food, right? So that's not working either. And so Lenin comes up with that new economic policy, right? So he says, okay, a little bit of private ownership, right? Small factories of 20 can operate, or small businesses. If you owe a certain amount of your harvest to the government, not all of it, although a lot of it, let's be fair, not all of it, and anything you produce above that quota, that's yours. You can sell it and keep the profit, right? So this is kind of at odds with the sort of socialist communist philosophy, but Lenin kind of needs to get the economy back on track, and so he puts these changes into place. And we said that it kind of worked, right? The Russian economy kind of recovers to a pre-war level, is what they say, which again was not great. It wasn't a fantastic economy before the war, but it's better than it was, right? So it's an improvement nonetheless. We say that Lenin pulls Russia out of World War I, right? They make a treaty with Germany called the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. We said it's a bad deal for the Russians. They lose a lot of land and resources, but they're out, right? So they're out and they can stop fighting, and that's what Lenin promised. And so Lenin, of course, is going to have a series of strokes, I think, in the early 1920s, and by 1924 he is dead, right? So there's three groups that are kind of vying to replace him, or three, I guess, positions. One led by Leon Trotsky, who is a hardcore socialist and wants to get rid of the new economic policy and have worldwide communist revolution. Sorry, Leon, that's not going to happen. But anyway, that's what he wants. We have people on the right like Bukharin, who like the new economic policy and think that, yeah, you know, we're going to get to communism and maybe we'll get to worldwide communism, but baby steps, right? We'll get there. This new economic policy is working. You know, let's see how it goes, right? So we've got hardcore socialist, you know, a little less so on the right, and then we've got Stalin in the middle, right? And Stalin says that, okay, we want to inspire a worldwide revolution, but it might take a little while, but we can build socialism in our country. We can do this on our own, and then we can be a model to all of the other nations, right? And so because of his kind of central position, often the central position is the one that wins because most people are in the center. Most people aren't extremists on one end or the other. Because of that, and because of his kind of careful political maneuvering and forceful personality, he wins, right? And so he becomes the leader of the Soviet Union. His opponents will kind of be pushed out. We said Bukharin is kind of kicked out of the Politburo eventually. Trotsky is eventually murdered, and that leaves this guy in charge of the Soviet Union. And like I said, he's going to be very important because Lenin, of course, instigates the revolution and sort of successfully completes it, but he dies kind of too quickly to have really done much, right? And so he's definitely an inspirational figure, and he's, you know, if you know the biblical story, he's kind of like Moses, right? So he's gonna lead the USSR to the promised land, but he can't enter, and so that's kind of very similar to Lenin. He leads the USSR to communism, but he's never going to sort of see that vision fulfilled because he dies too quick. It's really going to be Stalin who makes this. What's that? That doesn't what? That's not a good metaphor?
No.
It's okay? Okay. Right. It's going to be Stalin's the one who's going to create the Soviet Union as we kind of come to know it in the 20th century. It's not really Lenin's Soviet Union, it's Stalin's Soviet Union. Stalin's the one who's going to industrialize it and make it into a world power that will oppose and terrify the United States for decades, right? And so that's going to be the creation of this man. We read this on, what's today? Tuesday? Friday? We read this on Friday, and this was the sort of biography of Joseph Stalin. And what did we learn about him? Like, what kind of person was he? Just very quickly.
He was not good at studies.
He was not good at studies. I don't know if he wasn't good at studies. I think we heard he was a good reader, right? He read a lot. What else did we learn? Yeah, seemed to have a pretty sharp memory and could kind of recall things very easily. So seemed to be a pretty intelligent person, I guess, from reports. What else did we learn? Oh, I like that you rhymed it too. He was a shrewd, violent dude with daddy issues. You could write a song about Stalin. That could be one of the lyrics. Maybe that could be a music project for you, like a final music project. The Ballad of Joseph Stalin. He was a rude, violent dude with a violent past. What?
Sounds like one of those country songs.
I know. It could be a country song. It's got a sad ending. Actually, it's sad in the middle too. But anyway, right. So he's kind of he's pretty politically shrewd, right? He's very intelligent. He has kind of he's got some violence in his past, right? His dad was an alcoholic and abusive. What else do we know about him? Oh, right. He had that favorite book when he was a kid. Ooh, close. Something with P. Yeah, his favorite book as a kid was interestingly called The Patricide, right, which is the murder of the father. Dark. And in the book we have this hero called Koba, right? This kind of Robin Hood, stealing from the rich, giving to the poor kind of character. And Joseph Stalin kind of idolizes this character and wants to be him, right? And to the point where he gets called Koba when he's younger for some period, which is kind of interesting. Oh yeah, Ayushi says he had several nicknames, right? And so he what's that? Comrade card. Can you remind me what a card index is again? Boring stuff. Yeah, so card indexes was how they used to file information, right? So if you used to go to the library once upon a time and you need to find something, you'd pull out this really long drawer and it had all these little cards, almost like little recipe cards, and you'd have to go through them all and look for what you were looking for. And so yeah, he was Comrade Card Index because that was his brain, right? He could just find whatever he was looking for very quickly. It was all stored away up there. He was also called Uncle Joe, right, by Roosevelt. He was called the Man of Steel, right, before Superman. And actually, I just looked up on Translate because I wanted to confirm. But yeah, the Russian word for steel is Stal. So Stalin is Joseph Steele, secret agent. No. Yeah, so he put it right into his name, right? Because we read that that's not, Stalin, of course, is not his given name, right? He had a Drugovzchesky or something like that. I forget what it was. It's a very long name, but Stalin is not it, right? So he adopts this name that has to do with steel, and that's how he's going to rule, right? And his wife committed suicide, yeah. Right, so some of his policies lead to the death of millions of people, which we'll talk about today. And so apparently his wife, upon hearing about this, actually kills herself, which is pretty dark, right? When a spouse of someone kills themselves because of something that their partner did, whew, that's bad news, right? She didn't just, make him sleep on the couch, or she didn't just, she didn't leave him or divorce him. She right? So that's pretty extreme, right? That's some heavy stuff. And speaking of which, what I'd like to do is read a little bit about one of those issues. And so this is a little section called the Ukrainian Famine. And so it has to do with something that Stalin does very early on in the process of collectivizing farms. What did we say collectivizing meant again?
Bringing a bunch of people and their land and everyone all together to work on this.
Yeah, so Lenin started this process, but Stalin is going to make it happen, taking a bunch of little farms with little farmers working on them, put them in together into big farms and get everybody to work kind of as one unit. More efficient, not what the peasants want, but does Stalin care about that? Not so much, right? Not so much. Okay, so I want you to read these 2 pages. They're not in Microsoft Teams yet, so I just need 1 minute to put them there. And once I do, I'll just let you know, okay? So just give me 1 minute and I'll put them up. Okay, online people, the pages you need are on Microsoft Teams for you. Okay, ready, shreddies? All right. So here we have a little example of Stalin's method of governance, right? So we have a period here between 1932 and 33 in which we see him accomplishing a few of his goals at the same time, right? And so let's start off with question number 1 and see what else we can talk about here. But so there's kind of 2 famines that are mentioned here. What's a famine, by the way? Yeah, shortage of food. The harvest doesn't come in, or the harvest is ruined, and you have no food. Right, so you have 2 famines mentioned here, one in 1921-22, and then another one in 32 and 33. And what makes these 2 famines or food shortages? It's funny how that happens sometimes, eh? Shoed shortages. No. What makes these 2 food shortages different? The first one was? Right? Right, so the first famine seems to have been acknowledged by the Soviet government and by other world governments as well. Second one, not so much. Right, why on earth would Stalin go around saying, we have an abundance of food, and even exporting grain? So the grain that they had, they were actually sending out of the Soviet Union and selling it on the world market. Why on earth would someone do those things when it's quite clear that there is not enough grain? That seems ridiculous.
Well, here's the thing. You're a new type of regime. What you're
I am.
something new, and something like that has never happened before.
Right?
10 years ago, you said, okay, we don't have any food and we need something, and the world gave you food. You say that again, you prove that you're just not the right thing either. You're a mistake, and you have to just get away. So not acknowledging it was like, yeah, we got enough. Who said we're going to have?
Right. Yeah, so there's an element of, and I'm going to use this term, there's an element of saving face here, right? So yeah, in 1921, 22, that was still under Lenin, right? They'd just gotten rid of the Tsar, they'd just gotten out of the war, they're fighting a civil war, thing is a pretty topsy-turvy kind of time. And yeah, sure, they needed a little help, right? They were just getting on their feet. But now, 10 years on, and 10 years on into communism, which is probably one of the important pieces, what does it look like if they go around saying, oh gosh, we don't have enough food, help us, foreign countries? Does that look like communism works? No, right? It's going to look bad. The Soviet Union is going to lose face. It's like, gee, this world superpower led by this man of steel, and yet they can't even feed themselves. How embarrassing, right? And that's actually going to be a common thread that happens all the way through the 20th century here, is that the Soviet Union will not be able to produce enough food to feed itself, and they'll still export some of the grain they grow, because communism has to be seen as working. And so the Soviet Union will go to all kinds of lengths to convince the world and convince their own citizens that communism works. And so again, even though they'll never be able to grow enough food to feed the people, they will continue to export it and sell it on the open market in an attempt to convince people that, hey, business is good in the Soviet Union. But it ain't. It is not. Right, so there's definitely a non-acknowledgement of this second famine, right? What else is different about this one? About this food shortage?
Well,
They kind of blockaded Ukraine. How so?
they blocked the border, the Russian-Ukrainian border,
Yep.
said that no food was going to go to Ukraine.
Right. So they basically closed the border between the Soviet Union and Russia and Ukraine. They made sure that no food shipments went into Ukraine. They created an internal passport or identification system to ensure that Ukrainian citizens could not sell things to buy grain. They forcibly took grain from these Ukrainian farmers, right? The law was passed that Communist Party members could confiscate grain. They could just come in and legally take it. What if you tried to steal grain back? Death, right? So let me just see if this is. We'll get to that. So would you go so far as to say that this famine was kind of a man-made famine, whereas the earlier famine was kind of a environmental one?
The 1920s famine, that was caused by the drought?
Yeah. But I think they also experienced a little bit of a drought in the 30s too. Did they say that? The drought was part, or did I miss? Maybe I just assumed that. I'm not sure if there was a drought implicated in the second one. Oh yeah.
The droughts were the first one.
Okay. So let's look at number 2. What steps did the Soviet government take to collectivize agriculture? We may have covered some of these already, but what do you got for me? You sat up, you exhaled, you're ready to go. What do you got? What steps did they take to collectivize agriculture? If you can work collectivization of agriculture into your song, I think that'd be very impressive too. I don't know what you'll rhyme it with, but I actually have a great song for the end of the Soviet Union that I'll try to play to you in a couple weeks. No, I won't play it. I'll play the video, but it's a pretty good song. Believe it or not. What did they do? What did they do? Tell me what they did to collectivize the agriculture.
I think that's one of those questions that the answer was removed when the book was edited.
It could be. Let me just see here.
Because the only place they mentioned collectivization was the last paragraph on the first column on page 80.
Mm-hmm.
It goes on to the second column.
It's. I think probably you might be right. I think based on what we've read here, probably the answer is that, you know, the Communist Party legally just took the grain from these peasants. They just took their harvest, and then they made it impossible for them to get anything in any other way except from the state, right? So the state provided them with those 80 kilos of grain for a year, and that was it, right? They had no other access to money or to work or to food. That's all they had. And you can hear some of these pretty dark things about people eating rats and dogs and maybe even other people. And I don't know how I don't know how accurate those stories are, but you know, it's pretty dark, right?
The cats and the dog stuff, you see it going on all over, even like this middle-aged sieges. People in cities will start eating them.
Mm-hmm.
And the cannibalism, I've heard about it in several sources. Yeah, they did start eating
Yeah. But I think that would probably be the answer to number 2, though, is that they legally they took the grain from them and they made it impossible for these people to acquire food any other way except through the state, right? So they forced this socialist system on them. What were the effects of this? They ate cats and dogs and rats and all sorts of things until what?
They ran out of cats and dogs.
And then, yeah, and then they start to starve to death, right? And so, how many people are estimated to have died in this period? How many people?
6 million.
Six.
As many as 10 million people may have died.
Yes, and there's a journalist who estimates 10, right? So anywhere from 6 to 10 million Ukrainian peasants die, right, as a result of this. Here's a question though. Why do Western governments ignore this?
They have relations. They said in the text that they have relations with the Soviet Union, and they didn't want to explore those relations.
Interesting. Is that a good reason? We don't want to rock the boat with the Soviet Union. We don't want them to be upset with us.
If you're a politician, yes. If you're a human rights activist, then call them.
If you're what? If you're a politician, then yes.
If you're a human rights activist, that's no.
If you're a human rights activist, then no. Can't you be both? Should you be both?
Exactly good type of people you want to talk to about human rights and stuff.
They're exactly the type of people you want to talk to about human rights and stuff.
Unless there's something good for them in like going after human rights, then they won't.
That's why we should talk to them. The more important it is to us, the more important it is to them. They will find the things that are important that we find important. If we tell them we don't care about it, neither will they. True, but we're also going to extend this into the present period, right? Because that's what the last question is about, is that should the Canadian government, or maybe any government, intervene in the affairs of countries who are guilty of acts of terrorism against their own people? And I don't know if I would necessarily call this an act of terrorism. Kind of, sort of. Usually I kind of think of terrorism as, well, no, I think of terrorism as being used by people who don't have political power. So if you don't have political power, you resort to terrorism to try to advance your political agenda. If you are if you're a totalitarian government, you don't need to resort to that because you have the power anyway. You can still use terror, but I don't know. I guess I don't know. It's probably true, but I guess I think about terrorism in a slightly different context. But I could be, in terms of the actual definition, I could be wrong about that.
As for the question, when you look at a country which is doing this thing from the outside, you definitely want to do something. The people inside, at the first view, they also want you to do something about it, but once you do something, the people inside will just beg you to stop it. Because, here's the thing, when you put pressure on the government puts the pressure on the people. If you do something bad against the government, you piss them off, and they have a lot of bullets and a lot of people to shoot. So they do it.
That is possible, right? So you have to make sure that if you're going to pressure a foreign government, that pressure doesn't wind up hurting the people that you don't want to hurt, right?
Sanctions, embargoes, don't work. Governments usually have a lot, like a lot. Who is going to get hurt is the people who won't have enough to even, say, afford a good meal for their families.
Yeah, because it's true, right? Because sanctions and embargoes imply that the government will listen to their people, right? So if you cut off certain supplies to a country, the people will be upset. They'll say, "Hey, we don't like this. Change this," and then the government will listen to them and do what the foreign government wants. But again, that implies that government is actually going to listen to the people and not brutally repress them instead, right? So It's true. It's true. You have to be careful with your response. Can you think of a modern example that this might apply to,
Yes.
where Canada can or should not intervene?
Well, you got that genocide thing going on.
What genocide thing?
Yeah.
The Uyghurs?
Yeah.
Oh, is that still going on? Oh, wait, it is, because nobody's done anything about it. Right. Sorry. Continue.
You got that genocide thing, and then you got some lovely countries, such as my own.
Okay. So we've got two examples, right? So we established a few weeks ago that we may have a genocide happening in Western China that seemingly nobody has done anything about because, again, nobody wants to rock the boat, right? Nobody wants to upset China. We have another example of Iran, right, where
Well, it's still not granted as a genocide, but whenever people take to the streets to give their message, they get batons and guns.
right, and so the sanctions that have been placed on Iran because of, I guess, violation of or pressure to conform to a nuclear deal, which of course the U.S. pulled out of, but that's another story. Those things have hurt the people, right? Because the government is not willing to accede to the will of the people, right? They're going to, if the people demonstrate and say, hey, we don't like these sanctions, do something, instead of doing something, they baton the people and say, quiet you, right? So again, we have to be careful how we intervene because not all things will be effective. Aliana, I feel like you want to say something. No? Is it morally defensible for a nation like Canada or maybe the US, Biden's US, not Trump's US, but is it morally defensible for us to not do anything? Is not rocking the boat a good reason not to intervene? No, they're not.
And then they say that we wanted to make nuclear weapons. My government thinks that all we want is nuclear energy, not weapons to blow others up.
But of course, the other countries are unsure of Iran's intentions, right? Once the technology, you can do anything you want with it, right? And therein lies although the refining of the two nuclear sources not the same, right? You need a much higher grade of plutonium or uranium to make nuclear weapons as opposed to nuclear power. But still,
We can't make that. And for the nuclear weapons thing, we don't have the resources to make that.
right.
Physical things we don't have.
But again, is it morally defensible for us not to interfere in other countries when something like this is happening, even if interfering in other people's countries has actually caused some of the issues that now are coming up, which the US is certainly guilty of? You think it is?
When you let a government, a totalitarian government, be there for some time, the people are going to rise up against it. They're going to overthrow it. Once other nations on the outside are being like, they are putting pressure on the country and they're wanting to overthrow the government. When uprisings happen, the government will just say that these are, I don't know, agents of the enemy, and they're going to shoot them.
Mm-hmm.
And that is bad. That's like you're giving the government an excuse to kill its own people.
So the people are basically on their own, is what you're saying.
Sometimes it's better to do nothing.
Sometimes it's better to do
It's
nothing.
better not.
Maybe. I don't know. I feel like doing nothing is much easier than doing something. Especially when you're...
Easier means
especially when you're dealing with a powerful country, right? It's very easy to put the screws to a small country that, has no military and, has no trade relationship with you. It's very easy to push those countries around, right? But yeah, when you're dealing with a superpower, when you're dealing with the Soviet Union, or when you're dealing with China or Russia or the US, it's much more, doing nothing is easier, right? It's easier to say, oh, I'm sure it'll work itself out, or I'm sure they'll be fine, or the people will rise up. Actually doing something is a lot more, have consequences for your own country, right? That's what makes it difficult, right? So when we talked about China and the Uyghurs, we said that for Canada to intervene in that, or to try to intervene, especially on its own, is going to hurt Canada, right? There's going to be a political cost, an economic cost. We are going to pay a price for that intervention. And
That's the political point of view. The human rights activist guy's point of view is that regardless, we got to do something about it.
I think true. I'm saying I think even the human rights activists would admit that there's going to be a cost, right? We're not going to get away. If we try to intervene and speak out and do something, I don't think we're going to be off the hook that easy. We're going to pay for it one way or the other. The question is it worth it? Are we prepared to pay that price, whatever it is, to attempt to defend these people or protect them? That's the whole question.
Here's the thing for that question. Look at it this way. So I don't do anything about it, and these people are going to be suffering a bit by bit over some time.
Yes.
I do something about it, and these people are going to get brutally hurt. So which one is the right thing to do? Do something and get them brutally murdered, do nothing and let them suffer bit by bit.
Well, it's difficult, and I don't want to undermine your perspective and opinion on this, because I think you're right. But I also think that there's a lot of ways to put pressure on governments, and I think you can. Maybe I'm being optimistic, but I'm hoping that there's ways to do it in which, you don't hurt the people you're trying to help, and that's of course the point, right? You don't want to make things worse for the people who are already suffering. So yeah, if the only thing you can do is going to make something worse for the people you're trying to help, then yeah, don't do it, right? But I'm kind of being optimistic in that there are things that you can do that can help these people without making their situation worse. But that said, that's not so easy, right? That's certainly not so easy, and it's definitely not easy when you have a big country that is well armed and that you have a significant economic relationship with, right? Who can, who can hurt you if they want to, right? It's a much more difficult question. Unfortunately, here in Ukraine in 1932 and 33, people don't really do anything, right? It turns out to be too much trouble, right? Too much cost, and so nobody says anything. And again, 6 to 10 million people will die, right? And again, compare this to the Holocaust, right? The Holocaust is a big deal in history and in sort of our cultural understanding of the world. The Holocaust is a big thing, and it should be. It's an awful thing, but 5 to 7 million Jewish people die in the Holocaust. But here we've got at least as many Ukrainians dying. Maybe not quite in the same way, but maybe so, right? They're starving to death over the winter with is it 17 people dying every minute? Ugh, right? That's pretty bleak, and on purpose, right? Stalin's policies and laws create a situation where he locks them in their own country and starves them to death, right? Is that any different from the Holocaust, where Jewish people are locked in a concentration camp and starved almost to death before they're gassed or incinerated, right? Is there any is there any difference? Is there any meaningful difference between those things? But before we answer that, let's take a little break. Okay? So come back in 10 and we'll talk about that. All right, and we're back. So we're talking about this Ukrainian famine, right? A period in 1932, 33, I keep forgetting, 32, 33, where Stalin's kind of ruthless collectivization policies kind of accomplished two things for him, right? He gets a bunch of grain, which is needed for industrialization, and you'll read about that very shortly. And the second thing is he gets to, less peasants, yeah, those fewer mouths to feed. But also, as they mention in this section, the Ukrainians have a bit of a nationalistic identity, right? They don't see themselves as Russians, they don't see themselves as Soviets, they see themselves as something different, right? And so they've been pushing back against Stalin and his collectivization efforts. And again, here he gets to do two things at once. He gets to take all their grain, which he needs for the Soviet Union and the cities, but also he gets to get rid of some opponents to his government and to his regime. And so we've kind of talked about this, and you know, they call this section the Ukrainian famine, but I wonder if it might actually be more accurately called a genocide, right? And so we talked about this a little bit at the end of the Second World War when we started talking about the Holocaust, and we said that the UN said that this is what a genocide was, right? The systematic harming or killing of a particular national, ethnic, racial, or religious group or you destroy them by either killing them or by imposing living conditions that seek to bring about their physical destruction, or by preventing births, or by transferring children out of the group. And so I ask you, does this fit the definition of a genocide in some way? Was it against a particular national or ethnic group? Hold on, you can get to the button in a second. So yes, it was, right? This was directed specifically against Ukrainians, and they were identified, right? The internal passport system would distinguish them from Russians, right? And so or made it impossible for them to sell goods in order to get money. So this was perpetrated particularly against Ukrainians and Ukrainian peasants. Did they do any of these four things? Did Stalin do any of these four things? What's that?
That's what I was going to say.
Okay, that's the but. Okay, okay. What's the but?
Was Stalin seeking to kill them?
Was Stalin seeking to kill them?
Or were they just collateral damage?
Well, the other question, and sorry, I'm going to answer your question with a question, which is not polite or nice, but I'm going to do it. Does it matter? Does it matter if your genocide, does it matter if it's intentional or not?
Not completely, kind of.
Not completely, but kind of. Okay.
Think of it this way: when someone is like taken to the court for murder, and they prove eventually decided the murder wasn't intentional and it was accidental, the punishment is less.
Okay. That is true. So and so I'm just going to rephrase here because I'm sure online people can't hear you in my microphone. So what Ahmad is saying, well, when somebody kills someone else, there are different levels, right? There's first degree murder if you think about it and plan it out and then do it. There's second degree murder where you just kind of do it and you don't put a lot of thought into it. There's things like manslaughter where you've killed someone, but it was kind of by accident. And so for individual people, there are levels of responsibility, I guess, depending on your intent or depending on whether you fully meant to kill this person or whether you killed them by accident. Does that apply here? Or should it apply here? Yes.
Since like he was already falling behind everyone else, he wanted to catch up with them. This is gonna sound really bad.
It already does, but keep going.
The Ukrainians were just collateral damage.
Okay, so one argument might be that this was all about the requisition of food for industrialization, and oops, 6 million Ukrainians just happened to die as a result. Amanda, I feel like you want to counterpoint this. Or do you? No? You just listening? Okay. Maybe, but then if that's the case, why not just take the grain?
You wanted a lot of grain?
Yeah, but why not just take it, right? If his goal was to obtain food for urban populations so he could feed his industrial machine, why not just take the grain and leave these people alone? Say, sorry, I took all your grain, my bad, maybe you can grow some more next year.
He made sure they were alone.
He made sure that they
They were left alone. Not letting them to go here and there.
so,
True, it does apply to like kind of trying to kill them, but I think what he was trying to do is to bring their national spirit to make a point that you are now under Russia and you like it, or else.
maybe it's true that he was trying to assert his will over a population that was not complying with what he wanted them to do. It's true.
If it wasn't for this a lot of food taking and industrialization, in 6 years he wouldn't have been able to stop it. We would have been speaking German.
So the yeah. So again, I'm hearing a little bit of, and not that I'm criticizing this, but I'm hearing a little bit of like an ends justify the means kind of position here. And so, yeah, he was trying to industrialize, and him being able to industrialize meant that he being Stalin, that Stalin was able to sort of credibly fight in the Second World War. He was able to stop Hitler. That's a good thing, and therefore, this is a good thing. But I don't know.
I just said this, but he didn't know that there's enemy.
He did not know that at the time. That is true. And I think at this time he had just signed the Non-Aggression Pact, or maybe a couple years after. Yeah. Yeah, so he definitely couldn't have known that. That wasn't his intent. And it's true, right here in the convention, it does say acts committed with intent to destroy. And so the question is, although some people have debated this, does intent matter? And did he intend to do this? Or is it an oops, I did it again kind of thing? He did. He was trying to bring about change and did succeed in that.
Yes, and change is difficult.
Yeah, change is difficult. But is it so difficult that 10 million people need to starve to death? Is it that difficult? Or, if it is that difficult, does the change need to happen in the first place?
But here's Stalin, yeah. If you are Stalin.
We need another perspective here. Rose, Aliana, B, Amanda. We need the opposite side to this argument. Ahmad's making one case. What's the other side of it? What's an opposing argument here? You're not going to make me make it, are you? I'd rather you make it. I'd rather you make that argument. What's the opposing argument here? There's no opposing argument? Oops, accidental, not a genocide, just a famine with some unintended consequences.
He didn't keep
It's true. But again, true, he took all their grain. True, he was trying to feed his industrial cities and, industrialize because he was way behind. That is very true. And successful because he does industrialize. But he closed the border to all food shipments. He made it impossible for Ukrainians to sell what they owned in order to gain food, which you would think, it would be their right to sell family heirlooms to feed themselves if they wanted to, but that was illegal too. And so I don't know, how is it believable? Is it credible that if you took everyone's food, like if I went to your house and I locked you in your house and I took all your food out and I made sure that you could not escape from your food, you could not escape from your house, and then I went back in 3 months and, oh, whoops, you died. That was an unexpected consequence. Is that believable? No. How could I not expect that if I locked you in your house and you couldn't get out and you had no food in your house and then you died, how could I not expect that that would happen? Right? People need to eat. And if I don't leave you with enough food and I lock you in your house, you're going to die if I leave you there long enough. So is there any way that we could believe that, oh, Stalin didn't know this was going to happen? What's that?
Definitely did know that some, at the very least, would die. But 10 million is exactly some.
I mean, he was maybe willing to sacrifice 10 million.
What if I told you, and I'm not sure about this detail, I've got to check it. I think it's correct, but I'm not entirely sure. But I think his wife committed suicide over this. I think she found out what he did, and then so I don't know, does that lend some credence to the idea that he meant to do this? Yeah. She did not. Well, she didn't have much of a choice at the end, but
Well, at the end, yes, but before that, she was his girlfriend. She didn't kill herself. Here's the thing. So you take all the food, right?
Yep.
You want to spend that food on people that are making factories, right? The people they take the food from definitely want something to eat.
Yeah, they do.
They do. So they go to the cities and they buy the same food you took from them. So you're gonna take back what you're taking from them by force and get it back, basically. You lose what you're taking. And you won't be able to industrialize as fast. So we can say that by closing the borders, he made sure that they can't take that back. Not humanitarian, but practical.
Ooh. Not humanitarian, but practical. Well, and it's true, right? And one of the things that you've pointed out here is something that the communist state kind of isn't, on paper isn't supposed to be, but in practice often does. The state comes first, right? And we saw that in fascist systems, and we see it here in a communist system as well. The state, the good of the state comes before the goods of the people, even if there's 6 million of them. And so, yeah, the Soviet Union needed to industrialize, absolutely, and Stalin put her on the path to do so. And the individual rights of those 6 million people, I don't know, to live or to simply, eat the food that they had grown, those rights don't matter anymore because it's the good of the state, right? And so, again, I would like to sort of build a contrast here between political systems that put the state above all else, and individual freedoms are, kind of relative to whatever the state happens to need at the time, or political systems where individual rights matter, right? There are things that might be good for the state, there are things that might be preferable to happen in the state, but you can't override people's human rights to get there, right? And so again, democracies, not always, but in many cases, try to operate this way, right? Where, yes, there might be things that are good for Canada, but you can't trample all over people's human rights and charter rights in order to do it. However, in a fascist or a communist or an authoritative system, you can do that, right? You can, because their rights don't matter, what matters is the good of the state as a whole. So there's a perspective thing, right? There's a perspective on whose rights and needs should come before whose, right? The state or the individual.
Something that goes with the ends justify the means. In the communist Stalin Soviet Union, no one's individual rights matter. Everyone were to be sacrificed in order for the union to prosper forever. Compare that to, and I'm not saying each of those people are good, compare that to Hitler's fascist government.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you're a Jew, Roma, or Nordic, then yeah, stuff we're going to go really good for you. If you're like German and Aryan, things are going to get real nice for you. The others, not so much. Auschwitz is not a good place. Some would die, and some others' lives will become a lot better.
True.
So that sacrifice is so some group of people and the government, a selected group and the government will prosper. Is bad. Still better than the other one where everyone are to be sacrificed in order for just the government to prosper. And this is the difference between
It's true. So there's been many points in history and in many countries around the world where some have been sacrificed in order for the good of all, right? And again, that's exactly the subject of tomorrow's holiday, right? Is the fact that we remember the fact that some people sacrifice themselves for the good of many, many others, right? That's why we look at them as heroes, right? Maybe not because they particularly did anything so great in war, but they stood up and sacrificed themselves for the greater good, right? The people in Canada and the people of Europe. The distinction I'd like to draw here is that for the most part, not always, but for the most part, those people volunteered to do so, right? They had the choice to sacrifice themselves for the greater good. The Ukrainians did not. Nobody asked them whether they wanted to make the Soviet Union great. They were simply sacrificed on the altar of communism, if you will, in order to industrialize and in order to sort of decrease resistance to Stalin's program. And again, is that desirable? The last thing I'll show you is kind of what sums up, I think, Stalin's approach here, but also this kind of ends justify the means sort of idea as well, is a Stalin quote. And that's not me saying it, by the way. That's Joseph Stalin. You can see very clearly right there. See, it says Stalin. It's not me saying it, but that's what he says. Death solves all problems. No man, no problem. So yeah. Well, it's true from a certain perspective, but it's pretty dark, right? And again, does anyone want to live in a state where this is the situation, where this is the way that the state operates? And I guess it's fine as long as you make sure that you're not a problem. But that of course means that you pretty much have to go along with whatever the government tells you to go along with. Because if you don't, you're a problem. And then that's how problems get dealt with in the Soviet Union. Yeah. Okay, that's all we'll do for today, good people. Online people, I'll let you go now. Remember, there's no school tomorrow, so you can sleep in and have a nice day and do whatever you want. And I'll see you on Thursday. So, goodbye. Yeah, have a good rest of the day.